In this next conversation, we're going to talk about why it makes sense from a business perspective to support the farmers who are doing this work and to offer climate-friendly food options. So again, we'll have a chance to hear from Beth from American Farmland Trust. We also have Kimberley Sundy, the Senior Director of Sustainability for Kellanova. Round of applause. Paul Lightfoot, who is the General Manager of Patagonia Provisions. And Dorothy Shaver, who is the Global Food Sustainability Director for Unilever. Another round of applause, please. So while they're getting settled, let me acknowledge some of our other partners who have helped support this week's events, including King Arthur Baking Company, Little Sesame, Nature's Find, Nature's Path, Nyman Ranch, Oatly, Parlor Coffee, Raw Foods, Ceremony, Simply, Strong Roots, and Stonyfield. Round of applause, please. So I'm going to start with a question for you all. It's so nice to see you all, by the way. Thank you for being here. My first question is, how are you all supporting your agricultural supply chains transition to be more climate smart? And then how hard is it to do that? Kimberly, do you want to go first?
I would love to. Good morning, everyone. I think that one of the things that we're really committed to doing at Kellanova is thinking about some of those more popular foods and brands that consumers know and love and trust, and really working behind the scenes to think about what are those things that we can do to make them better, right? We always say even better at Kellanova. And so we've just launched this pilot project with Ahold Delhaize, one of our biggest customers, and we're working with them, our key wheat supplier, Bartlett, out of North Carolina, and then, of course, Arva to do some measurement, verification, and reporting for us. And the reason that that project is so important is that when you think about a cheese that you probably are never really thinking about the fact that it has such a small footprint, that all of the wheat that's grown for those Cheez-Its that come from our Cary manufacturing facility are coming from a very small 125-mile radius. You're probably not thinking about the fact that that wheat is also milled and then sent to our Cary manufacturing facility. And you're not thinking about the fact that we're working with those farmers to implement those regenerative practices, right, and then work with them to make sure that those farmers are also mentors for other farmers. So we're really thinking about how can we do better, and how can we do those things that consumers aren't necessarily asking for today, but that we want to give them.
You're building it in and creating those partnerships that are so necessary. Mm-hmm. Paul.
Yeah, so we're in business to save our home planet. That's the mission of Patagonia, and we make mostly apparel. So when we were learning about the environmental impacts of cotton, this goes back a while, we sort of fell in love with the idea of regenerative organic practices, mm-hmm, which draw down carbon, take synthetic fertilizers, which are made from natural gas, out of our inputs of our cotton farms, and eventually decided that if we were serious about our mission, we needed to be in food as well. Yeah. So with Dr. Bronner's and the Rodale Institute, we stood up the Regenerative Organic Alliance, of which I'm now the board chair, and we decided that for all of our non-seafood food products, and seafood can't be organic certified, they're based on ingredients that are regenerative organic certified, which we think is the highest standard for environmental impact for food.
And you're really building that network of farmers and producers who can supply that and helping them make those transitions.
And you asked if it was hard. The answer is yes, it is hard. So, we can't with our standards call a co-packer and say, here's our recipes. We generally go directly to farmers, and we give them, forward purchase contracts guaranteeing a price and a volume over a long period, because otherwise it's just too much risk for them.
Right.
So it's hard, but it's the kind of hard that we think is easily worth it.
And it goes back to the stability that is necessary that we heard on the first panel. Dorothy.
Thank you for having me. So I'm at Unilever, which of course has big brands here in the U.S. such as Knorr, or Knorr, depending on how you say it, and Hellmann's. And we have two scaled programs here in the United States. One is in Iowa, which is the Practical Farmers of Iowa, which we actually created. And with that, we really said that, if we create a collaborative of farmers, we can work together with those farmers and our suppliers to really change the way that foods are grown in Iowa. And so we work with them and also with PepsiCo and ADM, so it's all about that collaboration together to grow soybeans for our Hellmann's mayonnaise together with the corn for Doritos. And we've been working with them for quite some time on a variety of different projects. And it's been going really well. And I'll now answer the question about, is it hard?
Right.
And the reason why I answer it is because we really, at Unilever, we're really committed to really helping farmers go through the transition to regenerative agriculture. And I think the more that I'm learning about it, the more is that we'll forever be going through a transition, because we always have to change the way that we're farming in order to be more resilient to climate change, which is just becoming more and more unexpected. And so we were really proud of what we were doing with our soybeans. It's one of our champion projects, of course, as you can imagine. And last year they had a hard year, so they reversed some of their practices and went back to what they're comfortable with, as you can imagine. And the way that we found out is that we measure on the field. We measure impacts around climate, around biodiversity in a variety of different areas. And that's how we found out that the practices had been shifted. And I think the reason why it's hard is a few things. One is that, then you go back to the business, which I happen to work for a large business, and these numbers are critical to get to our climate transition action plan, right? Regenerative agriculture practices are critical to that. And we published a new one this year, and it's very much in there. And then you go back to the business, and some of those numbers have shifted, and they will continue to shift. So what do you then do about reporting, and how do you really talk about that? And I think this goes into the brand part of it, is that numbers and logos and checkboxes and certifications give people information, but it doesn't change the tides of what consumers feel about your products. When we start to talk about stories and farmers, and if I were to tell people that story, they might say, that's so interesting. I didn't even actually connect my Hellmann's mayonnaise with a farmer, right? And I think, and a farmer in America. And I think when we start to humanize these stories instead of put these numbers on there, that's when we'll drive change through our brands. And that's when people will say, oh, food is actually so emotional. And so that's when we'll really have the competitive advantage. So I think those are the things that we really try to look at from the whole chain in relation to how do we start to tell those stories. And I'll just tell one quick story. It didn't happen in the US, but I like it anyway. So in Italy, we're growing our rice following regenerative practices. And it's one of the rare circumstances in Unilever where the supply chain isn't segregated. So all of our rice for our Italy risotto packets, Knorr, is from this one farm. And so we wanted to do a program. So we put grannies on the farm about regeneration of old dishes, because a lot of Gen Z people don't like the Knorr brand. They think it's like for their grandmas. And we put them on the field together with a pop band, and created this really cool social media campaign. And we measured the perception of the brand, and it significantly shifted the perception of how Gen Z feels about our products. And if we really want to make this change, farmers need to love the way that they farm and feel confident that it's going to help them be resilient to climate change. And consumers need to love those foods.
Yeah.
And we need to work together on that whole system, and they sit all together. So it's really imperative for a business to see it as profitable, to talk about it to consumers in the right way, in an emotional way that really does change the way they feel about your food, and to make sure that farmers feel well supported by having a collaboration.
Absolutely. Please. And, Beth, Dorothy was so good at bringing up what AFT does so well, which is make it farmer-centered, people-centered, humanizing these issues, because it's very hard for, I think, all of us as eaters to understand what farmers go through. Can you talk a little bit about that and why AFT is so focused on the farmer?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, we're not going to have any food or fiber or fuel if we don't have farmers out there. It's as basic as that. And so what we do a lot is we work directly with some farmers and working with various corporations in a whole variety of ways to help bring that the people factor to the whole, to the value chain. So one thing that American Farmland Trust does is we work with farmers and we train them on soil health. What is soil health? Why is it so important? How can you improve it? What practices can a farmer adopt that will improve the productivity and the soil health of their land, which relevant for this week, you're sequestering carbon, you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions a lot of the time and adopting those practices. We also train other ag practitioners who work directly with farmers. It could be fertilizer or seed salespeople, and we train them on soil health as well. One thing that we haven't spoken about today is a lot of farming, especially in the Midwest, but really about across the country, a lot of farmers are using rented land.
Right.
Right? So many own their own land, but they also work much more land than that, and it's land that they rent. And if you don't own the land or you don't have a really long-term contract, first of all, there's less incentive to really invest in what you're doing on that land for the long term. So we work with non-operating landowners, and many non-operating landowners happen to be women. And so we have programs where we are building these peer-to-peer networks of women, non-operating landowners, and we train them on what's going on in their supply chain. How do you talk to the banker? How do you talk to the insurance person? How do you talk to the seed salesperson? How do you talk to the farmer who's renting your land and farming your land, and sort of understanding a lot of the risk that they take on?
Yeah.
And one of the end results is that you see a lot of these women are they're having more conversations with the farmer who's renting their land, and they're sharing in some of the risk. And they're saying, you know what, I would really love for you to be planting cover crops here, and I will, share some of the costs, some of the risk. And we've really seen a lot of benefit coming from that. We also we have a program called U.S. Farmed, which is a certification program, excuse me, that is for companies that can certify that 95% or more of their agricultural raw materials are coming from, are being grown right here in the United States. And so one of the things that I love about that program is that a lot of the funding that comes from that is being used to train farmers and ranchers on land protection, on succession planning. The last panel we were talking about why succession planning is so important. And so I think being able to sort of come at the issue from so many different directions and so many different people really helps to make a much stronger partnership with corporations as well as farmers, and for a much more sustainable and climate-friendly ecosystem.
No, yeah, I mean, those partnerships are key. We've heard it from the other three panelists for sure. The de-risking for farmers is essential. What I want to talk about a little bit now is how we story tell this to eaters, to consumers, to the people purchasing these products. And Kimberly, you talked about Cheez-Its, and it's like such a familiar thing for most people. I mean, I grew up eating them. Can you talk about, using that as sort of the icon for regenerative farming?
I mean, I think Dorothy did such a nice job of talking about this when she was saying that we really have to make it approachable, right? I think we can't talk about it in terms of regenerative agriculture. We have to tell consumers and shoppers that we're supporting you as farmers. We have to really bring it down when we're at the store level, to a Food Line shopper, for instance, to say we're supporting North Carolina farmers. We have to really make it approachable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that sometimes, the more technical people in the audience, or myself included, sometimes forget. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we really need to make sure that we're doing a really good job of is personalizing, because consumers care about where their foods come from. Investors certainly ask us a lot of questions about, tell me more about these practices. Where is the food coming from? Who are you working with to help, de-risk these practices? Where are these technical advisors coming from? And making sure that we're doing that in a way that really does a good job. So, we are always going to augment things with video, with QR codes, and of course, transparency is a big part of our agenda.
Yeah.
So for our more scrutinous consumers, it's always making sure that we have the data to really help make sure it's public facing, to make sure there's transparency attached to it, and to make sure it feels approachable for consumers who are on the other side of the value chain, who are maybe less technical and less, familiar.
Right. Paul, I think Patagonia and Patagonia Provisions does such a great job at storytelling, but how do you... It's often very difficult to translate into little sound bites or little films or buzzwords that consumers can understand. So when they're making decisions at the grocery store, they want to purchase, the good products.
So there's very little storytelling you can do as someone walks down the aisle in a supermarket. Patagonia has a really trusted brand. So in many ways, it's the way that the product just appears with the P6 mountain range logo. That said, once a customer is activated with the product and they engage with the company, then we can do more long-form storytelling. Patagonia considers itself a storytelling company, always has, But our stories sometimes diverge from what you might expect. Like, we're not always trying to tell the cheerful story.
Right.
I'm here to tell you the story that I think the way we grow food today may prevent humans from growing food tomorrow.
Right.
That most of the farmland in the U.S. is growing crops with synthetic fertilizer made from natural gas. That's not that fun of a story to tell, but we view our role in the world because of our mission to tell that story.
You have
so
to.
it has to be a product that people love first, and then once they fall in love with the product because of its taste, perhaps because of its nutrition, then we get to the second, third, or fourth attributes,
Yeah.
which are about environmental impact.
None of this works if it doesn't taste good, right?
It's exactly right, yeah.
Right. Dorothy, Kimberly brought up this idea of transparency. I've been hearing a lot about really honesty and bluntness over the last few days. You've always been very transparent about what Unilever does, but that's very difficult. And I wonder for you, as somebody who has to tell these stories constantly through Stone Soup and other things, how you handle that sort of like the negative part of it.
I think it's just really important to just tell the truth and I think it's also important to make it feel like a lesson for people, because we don't have time for every single company to make the same mistakes and then fix them. So actually, if you make a mistake, it's up to you to actually tell what you did and how you fixed it, so then the other company can skip that step. So that's really part of who I would like to be as a human. And sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes I get off a stage to be really candid with you, and I think, oh shoot, I hope nobody soundbited me. But I just think it's really important for us to feel like we're really drivers of change. So to share our tips and tricks and what worked and what didn't work. And I do want to share something really quick that didn't work, actually, when it comes to consumer facing. And I think it's really something that's really quite interesting, because we have this little pot of noodles that we sell in the UK, and the demographic is really kind of teenagers, right? Eating it on the go, We've made the nutritional value better. I'm a dietitian by background, so I pay attention to that a lot. And then we put it into a compostable pack. I'm talking 14 to 15-year-olds who eat noodles out of a thing, right? And then we didn't do any we didn't talk about it at all, and I'm afraid that we didn't do much consumer insights. And then the pack wasn't as great, because it kind of fell apart if you left the water in there for too long. But you're a teenager, right? And you're probably going to leave the water in there for too long. And I'm not sure what we think is the opportunity for them to bury it either, right? I mean, it seems like a real stretch. So anyway, we did that, and then we're like, well, that doesn't work. And I think it's so important for us to be like, it actually needs to be a long journey of consumer insights, followed by doing something that makes sense, followed by making sure that there's marketing spend behind it, so that we can explain what we've done, so that you make it a real proposition. Because a lot of the time, it's the SKU of the product in your portfolio that isn't the highest volume one, right? But in order for us to make this work, we need to make the best products the highest volume ones, right? So then we need to make sure there's marketing spend behind it. So I told you that story because it's so important to make sure that you just don't throw out everything because of one of those experiences. And at Unilever, we're not. I mean, we tried that out. It didn't go that well. We need to shift it. We need to change it, and we will sharpen it. But it's so important to stick with it and make sure that you really support it by a marketing campaign.
You have to tell the whole story.
You have to tell the whole story, or else it's just annoying.
Yeah, it's really annoying. Beth, I'm going to give you the final 30 seconds. What advice do you have for companies who are listening? You know, how they can become part of the solution instead of part of the problem?
I think a lot of it is be willing to work with your supply chain. And you may not have enough procurement or operations staff to do it, but then work with organizations like American Farmland Trust, and we will help be sort of your tendrils to get closer to the farmer and to try and drive this behavior change.
Partner with AFT, companies listening. Round of applause for this panel. I'm so grateful to all of you.